What is going on, guys? I wanted to hop on this video real quick and give you guys some information about the players that are falling down draft boards and the biggest ADP drops of this past month. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you guys my thoughts and if I think this is justified and why they're being drafted lower than they should be, or maybe they won't be. So this is going to be a great video once again because it's always good to stay up to date on the football news because fantasy football is very closely correlated to NFL news, and let's just see what's going on. So as always, if you guys find any bit of value from this video, go ahead and like it up. And also, if you click this video and you guys aren't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because you clearly found the video somehow and you're looking for the information, and this is where it all is. But those of you that have been around here before, you know me, I really don't like to waste any time in these videos. So the very first player that has been dropping a lot in ADP over the past month is Deebo Samuel. And I'm not very surprised about this because I've been saying Deebo has been overvalued for months now, and finally the public is starting to catch up with me. But I don't hate Deebo as a player. I want to start this out by saying that I have been down on Deebo all year, but that is solely because of the ADP he's going at right now. But in fantasy, it's not much about talent, it's more about situations. His situation, honestly, is just not one that I want to buy in with him going in the third round. Just to set the tone here and give you guys some imagery of what was going on earlier in the month, Deebo Samuel was being drafted in the mid-third round around guys like DK, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper. I've been seeing him drop a lot into the fourth round and honestly even the fifth round in some mock drafts that I'm doing, but that might be a little bit too gradual from what the regular public is drafting him at. And that ADP is a little bit more justified, but I'm still not really buying on it. Let me explain. The reasons he's dropping and why I personally am not drafting him very much in any of my leagues is because of the Christian McCaffrey effect. Ever since Christian McCaffrey got traded and signed to this team halfway through the season, he just has not had the same volume and workload as we've seen in previous years. And if any of you guys have watched 49ers games, which I assume at least one game you've seen last year with Christian McCaffrey on the team, you can tell that they just don't rely on Deebo as much as they used to. And if you go into the numbers side of this, before Christian McCaffrey joined the team last year, Deebo Samuel averaged almost 17 fantasy points per game. That's a really good number. But after Christian McCaffrey joined the team, the entire second half of that season, Deebo only averaged 11 fantasy points a game. And this is really unfortunate for him because he's taking all of Deebo Samuel's workload, and all of the work and volume that he gets is going straight to Christian McCaffrey. And the reason this is really bad is because we know Deebo is a dual threat receiver. He's great at catching the ball, but he can also run and be really effective in the ground game. So can Christian McCaffrey. And there's going to be a lot less plays drawn up for Deebo to run the ball now that Christian McCaffrey is there and he can take it all himself. And we saw that start to happen last year too. So they're essentially capping his rushing ability and turning him into a sole wide receiver. Now obviously he still will get rushing work, but nowhere near what he used to be. And all this is going to be especially bad if Trey Lance does start games this year, which honestly is pretty possible. As of right now, we're still in the midst of training camp and Brock Purdy does look like the starter, but God forbid he gets injured or Trey Lance just ends up starting a game or two. Every receiving option in this offense is going to decrease in value just because Trey Lance does not have the pure passing ability like Brock does. And Trey Lance is a really run heavy quarterback, so he's going to take a lot of the volume with his legs. So just due to Trey Lance's play style, this offense, in fantasy at least, is going to take a step back. And historically, rushing quarterbacks just don't support running backs or even wide receivers the same as a Tom Brady or Joe Burrow do. Quarterbacks that don't really run the ball as much. And they also lose a lot of red zone work because, as we've seen with Jalin Hyatt, he runs a lot in the red zone and they run a lot of RPOs, and Jalin Hyatt is projected 11 rushing touchdowns this year, so that's 11 potential touchdowns that could be spread around this offense. But regardless of that, let's just say Brock Purdy does start and play the entirety of the season, which again is also a possibility. He can support these wide receivers and all of these receiving options, but the problem is there's so many of them on this offense. They got George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Ayuk, Deebo. That's a lot of people to make viable, startable fantasy options every single week in and out. So I'm not completely avoiding Deebo, but in the third round, maybe even the fourth, that's just too early for me. If he keeps dropping into the fifth, maybe I'll consider it, but there's just a lot of other good options around that ADP that I'm just more comfortable taking. But the next player that has been dropping down draft boards a considerable amount is Jalin Hyatt, and all Giants receivers for that matter. And that's honestly a bit interesting considering how much training camp hype Jalin Hyatt has been getting. I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with the training camp videos. I've been making videos updating you guys on the training camp information every single day on my TikTok, but it seems like every day he's getting a good, crazy catch, but he's falling down draft boards, and let me explain why he's probably doing this, as well as all of the Giants receivers in general. What's been happening over this past month is that there's been a lot of Paris Campbell hype. And for those of you that watch these videos all the time, you know I made a video on Paris Campbell a while back. And Campbell jumped up 3 full rounds in this past month, which I assume got people thinking, wait a minute, if you have Saquon, Waller, and presumably Paris Campbell, how much room is there left for other receiving options to be viable? Because Daniel Jones in this offense isn't necessarily a pass-heavy team. If Campbell is going to be the third guy, do we really trust Daniel Jones to support 4 startable fantasy players? And that's why I'm assuming we're seeing the Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalin Hyatt fall from around 16 to 17 and 18 and on. It's because people are starting to realize there's a whole lot of upside in this wide receiver room, but is it also worth it? In general, I do agree with this because the offense is risky, especially for receiving options, and they haven't really had a good red zone threat or any real wide receiver one since Odell, for being honest. And I really do think this is going to be the Darren Waller-Saquon show, and everything outside of them is just going to be split up, and nobody was really going to be viable. Kind of like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. They had Juju, they had McCole Hardman, they had Sky Moore, they had a lot of decent options last year, but it was the Patrick Mahomes and Kelce show, and every other target that was in that offense was just being dispersed through everybody else, and nobody else was really startable. So I understand why all these Giants receivers have been falling, even though Jalin Hyatt has been doing good in training camp. But again, it's not necessarily the offense you want to be targeting. But if you're taking them with your last pick and most likely undrafted, I'm okay with that. But the next player falling down draft boards is Dalvin Cook, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this for yourself if you have done any mock drafts yet. Dalvin Cook has fallen pretty much a full round, and you can get him into round 7 in your mock drafts and real drafts right now, which is actually crazy because at the end of the day, yes, he's still a free agent and he's not on a team, but he's still Dalvin Cook and he's gonna go somewhere. So why not take a shot on him in the 7th round when he's most likely gonna be your RB1 or RB2? And yes, there is a lot of downside and risk because we just don't know what backfield he's going into, but you have to agree that there's no way in round 7 that he can't return value with whatever team he's on. And honestly, this seemed to be a really touchy topic because I see people saying, why in the world would you draft Dalvin Cook? He's not on a team. But round 7 though, I guarantee you once he gets signed to a team, he's going to be a 4th round pick easily. But with that being said, yes, it does matter what team he goes to. If he goes to a favorable backfield, but the only way he does not return your value at the 7th round ADP he's at is if he just doesn't get signed at all and he never plays another snap. And that's not going to happen. So I really like this pick right now. But Michael Pittman has been another guy falling down draft boards. He's fallen about a 1/3 of a round into the 6th round, which is pretty decent for guys that high. But this drop hasn't been all of a sudden. It's been pretty gradual over the past few months. I think people are finally coming to terms on how bad this Colts passing offense is going to be. And I covered this briefly in one of my other videos, but Pittman has been pretty efficient over the past few years with terrible quarterback play. He ranked top 20 in target efficiency and red zone target rate last year, but he wasn't really able to do much with it. I mean, he finished as a wide receiver 27, being worse than Gabe Davis and Christian Watson. And if we just look at his numbers from the outside looking in, he was really essentially a boom or bust wide receiver. And again, that was with all non-rushing quarterbacks, which still have good passing volume. Yes, their passes aren't great and they're not the best quarterbacks in the world, but with Anthony Richardson under center, they're going to be a lot more of a run-heavy team because rushing quarterbacks just open up the RPO and they take a lot of ground game and take a lot of touchdowns on their own. Like I was saying, Jalen Hurts is projected 11 rushing touchdowns this year. That is 11 touchdowns that these wide receivers and running backs aren't getting. And what all this brings is less passing volume. Anthony Richardson already isn't the best passer in the world, so on the smaller number of targets he does get, he's going to have to do a lot more to make up those fantasy points just to be somewhat efficient and reach his ADP that he's being drafted at. But he has been dropping a decent amount, almost into the 7th round in some mocks that you're doing, and that might be a little bit low even though there are a bunch of red flags. But moving on to the next player that has been dropping down draft boards is Dalton Kincaid, and he has fallen almost a full round over this past month. Now he's going in the 12th round on average, and I think that's just about justified. I do like Kincaid as a prospect, but historically rookie tight ends just do not produce. They're not very efficient and they don't get targeted very much, and this makes sense because young tight ends, not only do you have to learn how to receive, but you also have to learn how to block and be pretty much a Swiss Army knife lineman and receiver. And that's a battle in itself to be a good O-lineman in the NFL level, so it makes sense that it takes longer for tight ends to break out. So rookie tight ends usually aren't startable each week. And I know there was a whole bunch of hype coming into this season when he was drafted, considering he was drafted decently early, but I see some people mock drafting and actual drafting where Dalton Kincaid is their only tight end and their starting tight end, and that is setting yourself up for failure. Yes, I think there's a possibility that he can turn into something later down the line of the season, so if anything and you just want to take a shot on him, the 12th round pick really isn't that much, but you do have to be aware that his upside is capped being a rookie tight end. But I also find it hard to believe that everyone's kind of forgetting about Dawson Knox and just thinking that Kincaid can take over his starting tight end role, no problem. If anything, they'll just run more 2 tight end sets. But even then, he's not going to be the most consistent tight end, so you're better off just taking a better one a few rounds earlier, because if he were to be something, he won't be something until their bye week in the middle of the season. Moving on to the next guy here that has been falling a decent amount here is Kenneth Walker. And this one's kind of big. In the beginning of the offseason, when drafts started kicking up, I mean, it is still pretty early for mock drafts, but in the beginning of the season, he was being drafted mid-3rd round, and now he's gone all the way to the beginning of the 4th, and I even see him going in the 5th sometimes. And a lot of this has to do with his injury history. Last season, he missed a couple games and a good amount of the season with a groin injury, and now in preseason, he's injured his groin again, and it's kind of resurfacing. And these injuries are no joke. I mean, we saw LeBron James go out a couple games with a groin injury, and he never misses games. But obviously, this is football, and it's a more contact-heavy sport. Not to mention the fact that Zach Charbonnet is in this offense, Kenny McIntosh is in this offense. Yes, Charbonnet might be injured right now, but the point is, Kenneth Walker has been falling through these drafts because of his injury, and then this backfield just is not desirable. He's not the lead RB that we've really thought he was, and he doesn't necessarily have the most receiving upside. And I do understand this drop because being drafted around guys like Joe Mixon and Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of crazy. But I think this offense is going to be split around all of these running backs a lot more than people think. The next player that has been dropping a decent amount down these draft boards is Breece Hall, and this one's pretty dramatic. About a month ago, we used to be able to get Breece Hall in the 2-3 turn around guys like Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, or even Tony Pollard. Now he's dropping all the way down into the later part of round 3, and that's a pretty drastic drop for a guy that's being drafted at that high of an ADP. And there are some real red flags behind why he's dropping this much. And about a month ago, I was pretty confident in drafting Breece Hall. He was one of the most efficient running backs while he was healthy. He was pretty much on pace to be the rookie of the year until he got injured and missed the rest of the season, obviously. And I wasn't really worried about him coming off of this injury because he's a young running back. He's had a lot of time to recover over the offseason, and there's really no backups behind him in this backfield to take volume or carries from him. But the Jets went out and interviewed a whole bunch of other running backs over this offseason and training camp era so far right now. They've interviewed Dalvin Cook, Zeke, Leonard Fournette, and they got everybody worried about what is actually going on right now in this backfield. And it looks like one of two things are happening right now. One, Breece Hall really isn't coming back from injury as well as everybody in the coaching staff and team expected, so they're looking for other running backs to lighten the load and not put so much pressure on Breece Hall for him to come back super quick and super efficient, because maybe they don't want to run their almost rookie of the year running back into the ground, have him have more of an injury risk. Or number two, the worst option of these two, they don't think Breece Hall can take this entire workload in this offense. Maybe they just want that security blanket, but it's got a lot of people thinking, is Breece Hall really worth an early 3rd or mid-3rd round pick right now? Especially as of now with Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, the running back market is really just volatile and it's not very secure at all. So all of that has started to make people take Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Jahmyr Gibbs over Breece Hall, which I really don't find myself hating that much right now. But that's going to finish off this video of the top ADP drops that you guys need to keep in mind for this year, because it's always good to stay up to date on information for fantasy football so you can take an edge over your friends. If you did get any kind of valuable information from this video, go ahead and like it up and subscribe if you haven't already, because if you made it all the way through and you're not subscribed, I don't know what you're doing. But I appreciate every single one of you guys watching through the end of this video, so I'll see you guys in the next one.